Morning all, let's have a look at a game fresh off the press from yesterday, the Unive tournament, 27th October 2012. Hikaru Nakamura playing white against Sergei Tiviakov. So he played E4, Hikaru, and Tiviakov played the French defence. I'm pretty sure he used to play things like the Sicilian Dragon, maybe he plays all sorts of things. Now, Hikaru's next move is not that theoretical, but it's a very good system with good statistical results, not with too much need to learn tons of theory. It's D3, a King's Engine attack type system, is actually, I think, more effective against E6 than it is against the Sicilian, statistically anyway. When I researched this, D3 is more effective against the Sicilian, against the French defence than the Sicilian. We get C5, and you might think, well, this is a Sicilian anyway. The thing is, black has weakened some of these dark squares. If he wants to fianchetto, he's weakening even more dark squares if he plays G6. That's something to point out here. Now, knight F3 is played. Okay, and it looks as though white will continue in King's Engine attack style, with either fianchettoing the bishop, or as Magnus Carlsen has played recently, just bishop E2, even more solid, perhaps, and then after castling, knight D2, bishop F1, and then maybe a slow fianchetto, which might have some advantages as well. But okay, G3 hasn't been played just yet. Knight C6, and it's here that white does indicate, it seems as though he's going to fianchetto the bishop with G3. If the bishop really is going to be fianchettoed, then it would make sense for black to try and clamp down on the D4 square. Okay, and if black wants to clamp down on the D4 square, maybe this fianchetto would seem justified. That's on the assumption that black will have some control on D4 here. We get the move G6, which in principle, usually you'd want this pawn back there and this pawn here, because you want dark square control with your bishop, not just on D4 but on E5, and this pawn is maybe not as ideal. Or even this one, well, D6 or D5 later could also be an option with the pawn on E6. But okay, in this scenario though, white hasn't yet committed to having D4 sealed with black's control, and we get a very surprising fifth move now, just exposing basically black's dark square weaknesses, and this combination of weaknesses, this dark square complex, maybe is a little bit put under pressure now with this seemingly strange time wasting move D4. Why take two moves to go to D4? Why not play it immediately? Well, it's provoked extra dark square weaknesses basically. So that's very interesting already, this opening. Okay, so now black is faced actually with D5 as well. Unfortunately, the knight to tempo gainer for D5. So there is a critical decision what to do about this. So Sergei, he takes on D4, and after the knight takes D4, it looks like black's got a lot of dark square issues, which can immediately be exploited, in fact, because this knight hasn't yet developed. So say we see bishop G7, then knight B5, and then on D6, and black cannot play D5. There's a little cheapo, I think. Queen takes D5, but we'll check these in the second pass. So it seems, you know, already D6 is an issue here in this position, and hence, you know, sometimes when you start creating weaknesses in chess, they propagate other weaknesses, and that's how whole positions collapse. Here, another weakness is created now to defend this weakness, A6, to try and deprive the knight from going to B5. And if we look at black's position, you know, he's playing drafts at the moment. He's got the setup for drafts. This is supposed to be chess. The problem with playing drafts are the dark squares. Look at the dark square complex. Okay, so black's playing drafts, and Nakamura carries on by fixing now some more pawns on light squares with knight takes c6. Okay, because that c file might have been a source of counterplay. If black had time for queen c7 and knight d4, then maybe that c file would have been useful. Here now, the c file is now blocked, giving black a relatively poxy b file. Okay, an extra pawn in the centre, but black's still playing drafts here. So these little subtleties in the opening have created a dark square complex in black's position. Now d5, you might think, well, more pawns in the centre might mean d5, use the central pawn majority, but this is clamped down now with this next move, c4. The Maroczy bind is set up against black playing d5. Do these things have disastrous practical, tactical consequences? Well, we'll see. Bishop g7 is played, bishop g2. Knight e7. Does Naka have to worry about d5 here? Well, he doesn't actually. He just castles. And black is not interested, it seems, in playing d5 one move, if it is going to be played at all now, because his next move is d6. And white has this lovely binds now after knight c3 on that d5. And not only that, d6, is it actually an exploitable weakness in this position? It is a backward pawn on a semi-open file. Can white exert real pressure on d6 later, or the dark squares in general? After castles, there's a little probing move, which would be a kind of favourite move of Anatoly Karpov in many openings. Bishop g5, just trying to create weaknesses. If the bishop's kicked back, for example, maybe you can take, maybe you can just drop back. Job done. You've created another weakness with h6. Or f6, even more horrendous. You've created weaknesses on this diagonal. Black plays now queen c7, which does come at a price. White can now play the very comfortable move queen d2, with dual plans of not just exchanging off black's dark square bishop, but putting more frontal pressure on d6. We see now rook b8. White's in control of the position here for the moment. Black looks passive. This isn't the kind of aggressive position which Sergei Tiviakov sometimes gets as black when in his razor sharp openings. He seems to have been put in an uncomfortable, non-theoretical position, and this is just the kind of openings which Nakamura has been playing with such huge effect in recent months, getting his very strong opponents to think for themselves, to improvise from early on with sometimes very surprising little nuances, but here with minimal risk for white. So rook ac1, he's got a very nice coordinate position. h6 has been ruled out. f6 looks horrendous. d6 is a continual target. So what is black doing? Well, he has to find the plan. He plays c5. He does mark out d4, and it looks as though, well, if he unpins, maybe the knight can come to c6, or alternatively, bishop b7, put a bit of pressure on e4, try and hold on to d6 and try and get a draw. Okay, b3, bishop b7. Now we see a dark square marking move, and also an option for a potential attack as well. This move h4. The option for attack might be useful, but just the positional control of g5 might be useful. What is actually black doing if he can't coordinate any pressure here, and he can't play for d5 that easily? In fact, Sergei maybe gets a bit concerned about h5 from white. He plays h5 himself. More weaknesses though. Now we see a move which is very interesting. Now that I guess h6 is ruled out, it's not a concern. Is the queen ideally placed on d2? White doesn't really need to exchange off dark square bishops here. Although it might weaken black's king, black's got a lock on d4. You wouldn't want a huge knight on d4. And then black could work on this b file, maybe even a5, a4, work on white's structure here with a knight on d4. So why make things that easy for black to play bishop h6? It might be making things easier for black. So this plan of bishop h6 is kind of substituted for something different now, something very different. Queen d3. Waiting for black to see what does he do here. Queen d3. Queen d3 might opt for a triple battery option, or just rook d2 and then queen gets out of the way and double rooks. Okay, queen d3, bishop c6 is played here, putting pressure on b3, maybe betraying an idea like this at some point, or maybe a queen battery on e4 at some point with the option of bishop c3. That might be handy. We see queen e2, another kind of, it seems like a waiting move to see what is black's actual configuration going to be. Can black commit to a configuration here, a concrete one, which he can't kind of unwind from, and then white can optimize his pieces to that configuration. Well, we see bishop e8, the bishop coming off this diagonal. Just, it looks okay, a little bit passive. And here Naka goes for rook d3. So he can still put more pressure on d6, but also you might consider that in fact maybe g4 might be on the cards here at some point, just trying to undermine black's kingside structure. Maybe the bishop was put on here to add support to the kingside. Okay, rook dc8 is played. And now queen d2. Queen d2. Just waiting. What is black actually doing? Go back to defend d6. Black is indicating he's showing that he controls the position basically. So rook b6, and now, okay, more pressure on d6 with bishop f4. Saying to black, well, if you want to play e5, you're weakening d5. You're blocking in your bishop. d5 will be permanently under my control if you play e5. So actually a lesser evil bishop e5 is played. Okay, and now we see rook d1 piling up the pressure. And it might actually be that an exchange sack could be on the cards with rook takes d6 here. Imagine getting a big bishop on d6 across all of black's dark squares, playing e5, knight e4, knight f6. That would look quite tasty. It would actually look reminiscent of another game Tiviakov had in this same tournament against someone else, which we should go over maybe at some point. So king h7 is played. An exchange sack here, by the way, sorry, is impossible because rook takes d6, and that's, well, no, we'll check it out later, but no, it does seem impossible because of rook takes d6 attacking the queen. Bishop takes e5, rook takes, but I think black's going to be absolutely fine there. The exchange set is just a possibility at some point to consider. King h1 is played, getting the king maybe a little bit safer away from the dark square bishop. This light square bishop's not going to be a major problem. King h1 might also make use of the g file at some point. Maybe g4 could be on the cards. Knight g8 is played. Looks like a passive move. Is the knight actually rerouting somewhere useful, like maybe f6, h6 to get into g4? We'll see. Bishop e3, bishop g7. Okay, and now we see knight e2, getting out of the way of the bishop. Rook d8, and now bishop f4. It's a bit cat and mouse. I think a lot of annotators would use this expression cat and mouse, where both, well, one side usually is playing the cat and one side is playing the mouse. Here Tiviakov is playing the mouse. He's having to defend d6 again. How to defend d6? Well, in this position it is subtly different to before with the rook on d8, in that bishop e5 is unplayable. You just take here and then you just win the rook here. So given bishop e5 is unplayable, actually Naka has achieved a lot from doing, it seems, not much messing around. He's encouraged now e5. And when we move a centre pawn especially, we create a lot more access routes into the position and into the king safety than if we move a flank pawn as a general rule, I think. Here, the access routes, this diagonal, loads from e5 being played. Of course, d5 is also a permanent structural weakness, with a Maroczy bind for white totally controlling d5 here as well. So this is starting to look awkward, and factor in also this bishop is now restricted by its own pawn. So the positional advantages for white seem to be going up and up here. Bishop g5, creating even more weaknesses. If rook d7 here, it would seem that bishop h3, where would the rook go? It's not going to play f5, that's under control. So here, another concession, another weakness. Weaknesses breed weaknesses. f6. So that emphasises this diagonal access route as well, and of course white does have that one as well. So bishop e3, job done. Created loads and loads of weaknesses in black's position. The bishop really hemmed in, and in fact it seems here with this pawn structure here, if we have a pawn on f5, that will just be immediately undermining now g6 without any support from f7, which means h5 is more easily collapsible. That's something to bear in mind as well. So knight e7 is played here, and now the knight just comes back to c3, keeping an eye out and saying, you know, if you ever move the knight again away from d5, this knight will pounce in. This knight's now got to stand guard over the d5 square. Queen c8. This diagonal is useful for white, and now king h2 emphasises that for bishop h3, supported by the king to kick away the queen. Rook c6 is played, and now why not undermine black's structure? f4 is played. Black's hardly going to make use of the e5 square after taking here. He's not in a position to. It's no big deal to play f4 after queen b7. Maybe f5 might be good, but on the other hand, this structure is supported by the bishop on e8. So Naka actually elects for a different plan of attack here. And if f5, you know, he might want to support that with rook f1, etc. So actually he plays now f takes e5, which gives more square access, gives g5 access. Once this pawn's left there, he's got g5 now to use the torture black for the d5 square, because that's the defender of d5, that knight. So we see now bishop g5. The positional advantages are reaching a gigantic level. Backward pawn, bad bishop, Maroczy bind against this structure. Black has no counterplay. This structure seems a long way away from being challenged at all with a5. g5 under control, this diagonal nasty, this diagonal nasty, f-file also nasty, even if d6 is not going to be won. Rook d7 is played, and now we see bishop h3 taking over that diagonal for the moment. But you might think, well, black can challenge with bishop d7 at some point. Not really. It's very difficult actually, because of this bishop pointing at e7. Rook f1 is played, and it looks like torture for black without any counterplay whatsoever. No counterplay at all, it seems. And you might think, well, also, hold on a sec, couldn't Naka have just won a pawn here? I mean, we need to check that out after, but maybe it gives black something which Naka didn't want. He just felt, maybe rook f1, obviously he felt this was stronger. Maintaining a lot of threats like bishop e7, knight d5 if he wants. After bishop d7, there's no way of protecting now d6 with rook d7. He just plays bishop g2. Basically, at leisure he can pick up d6. It's not going anywhere. We've got Naka's got a Maroczy bind set up against d5. How's he going to defend d6 here? Sergei, you know, he's no mug though. He's approaching 2700. I checked out his FIDE graph the other day. He's been escalating. He's about 2694 now. Something. He's approaching 2700. It's amazing the brutality of chess with simple, delicate moves can cause so much damage to leave one with lots of weaknesses, no counterplay, and lots of access paths for the opponent into the position. We see bishop g4, and now white just casually just winning that d6 pawn. And with that, of course, well, these are now weak. Knight a4 might actually be useful for targeting c5. Access along here, f6. This bishop's still bad. After rook takes, queen takes, actually, Sergei's had enough of this game. He just resigns here. You might think, well, surely there's a concrete threat. What is actually a concrete threat to actually win this? Why did Sergei resign? Well, let's check with an engine in the second part of this game. Okay. Okay, let's go with knight c8 as an example. Queen d2. White's about 3 pawns up, technically, according to engine, not just 1 pawn up. Rook takes. All the positional advantages are worth quite a lot. Bishop e3 targeting c5. That pawn's probably going to drop next. Yep, 2 pawns up. I mean, was there any point in trying to defend it? If queen c7, I guess knight a4. Knight d5 even stronger. Queen f2, just putting more pressure there. Stopping bishop f8. Okay, that's more elegant, of course. So white can at least win another pawn. That c5 pawn's going to drop soon, in this variation anyway. If we go with knight c8, if we go with knight g8, well, again, c5 is going to be vulnerable, surely. Knight d5. Let's go with queen d8. Put the queen on that a5, putting pressure on c5. Let's do that technical move. Bishop h3, take off the light square bishops. In this scenario, well, just on very brief analysis, what is white doing? Well, he's got that huge knight on d5. Now he puts pressure on c5 slowly. It's just a lot better, isn't it, for white? But we would like to see a concrete consequence here. Maybe a3, yes, just to create a pass pawns over here. Is one way of playing it. White's just hugely up anyway. So let's go back in the game and have a look at what happened here. What happened in slow motion in this opening? I mean, are a lot of people going to start taking up d3 after they look at this sort of game? Because it seems already, you know, getting black to create dark square weaknesses with g6 and now pouncing with d4. It seems a bit unusual. In fact, the engine doesn't even like d4 here. It carries on with what you might think is consistent, not wasting 2 moves to play d4 in theory. But no, white does have something. Maybe Sergei had gone wrong here. He could make use of his e6 pawn in this position, apparently, with d5. The engine is suggesting d5. Is this a lesser evil, at least? On bishop b5, you know, white has weakened light squares, and it doesn't look right to play g3 and bishop b5. If white carries on with bishop g2, well, it looks like a standard sort of position, or not. Could black get away with that? Maybe. That seems to be okay. So it's possible, actually, that this surprising move maybe stumbled Sergei into perhaps not playing d5, and now he's left with these chronic dark square weaknesses at this moment, which are going to transform later into a horrible backward d pawn once he swaps these light square pawns for pawns like this. We get a backward d pawn on a semi-open file, but he does improve that bishop. That bishop will be complementary to pawns on dark squares, but he does block in that bishop. That's the problem. Okay, so bishop g7. We see that white has secured a positional, well, an advantage, and the evaluation, okay, it's dropped actually to not that big a deal. Now d6 improves white's chances, it seems, technically, but it's not really a big deal at the moment, it seems. Queen d2 though. White's got a comfortable position now on d6. It looks as though, even from an engine point of view, that black might be equal. Okay, so h4, h5. Maybe the critical mistake is later, but it seems as though black was passive without a plan here. Queen d3, and this wasn't doing much. It seems queen d3 to e2. We see d6 now being a problem after rook d8. Could that rook have just kept on d8? If we go rook d7, knight c6, is that a big deal? It seems as though black should be okay, actually. Maybe a too negative a picture was being painted. It might actually be some concrete blunders which actually make black's position fall apart soon. d6 is starting to look a bit more awkward. And the evaluation's definitely gone up. In fact, here, it's like white's doing well to take on e5 in this position. Let's have a quick look at this. Queen g5. What would be the concrete thing though? I'm not really sure. It solves black's problem structurally not to have the backward pawn. Unless g4? What is this of significance? Invasion with the rook for some reason. h5. Knight b5. Okay, it looks as though white's doing well here and black's kind of tied up. If he tries something like knight c6, what would be the problem with that? Then g6, rook e6. Oh, that's the point of installing the rook on d6, to put pressure on this structure and then undermine it, like this way and this way then. Okay, so black would be under great pressure there. But, okay, no, it's nice to have that d6 pawn to torture though. So, after king h1, knight g8, bishop e3. So for the moment, now we get this structural concession, which is forced e5, and white's advantage goes clearly up to a pawn. So what disaster has occurred here? Hang on, if we go back here, it seems white is able to do this. If he had played bishop f4 immediately, bishop e5, and it doesn't seem a big deal. He's made it seem a very, very big deal here with rook d8. Was that actually a blunder? Because then bishop f4 is targeting d6 without bishop e5. So if we don't play rook d8, say we play bishop f8, or even, well, if we play bishop e5, there's isn't there f4? And then just take. So it has all of a sudden got difficult for d6 in this position. Okay, so bishop f4, and now major structural concession, and white's advantage is about a pawn up now, basically, even though he's not a pawn up position. He's like doing very well. Okay, and after this move, even better. White's advantage is just growing and growing and growing. It's like becoming huge here, the positional advantage. F takes e5 is very much liked in this position to get that diagonal. If we went with f5, that's probably not as good at all, but still white has an advantage. Although that's growing in advantage as well. Maybe f5 is playable as well. But this is another way. Just to use that g5 square. Very uncomfortable for black. d6 can be taken here. There's no big deal about it. But Naka keeps the torture going on d6 with rook f1. Bishop d7 is played. Okay. Letting black install a bishop on g4. It's a bit harmless. It's not really doing much. Now taking on d6, and here black resigning. So, a bit of a positional masterpiece from Nakamura. I don't know what you guys think, but black was totally systematically outplayed without any counterplay. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.